I got accused of eco-terrorism for a bird feeder I hadn't even hung yet, by a woman in leopard Crocs clutching a chihuahua like it was a grenade and screaming about invasive species. 10 minutes later, 3 cop cars boxed in my truck like I was smuggling owls. But when they asked if I had the deed, I handed them paperwork not just for my cabin, but for the entire mountain her HOA fantasy was illegally parked on. I hadn't even unpacked my hiking boots when I got accused of ecological sabotage. Not by a ranger, not by the sheriff, by a woman in neon pink leggings, matching sweatband, and a chihuahua that looked like it had PTSD from squirrels. It was my first full morning at the cabin, my grandfather's old retreat in the hills of Stone Pine Ridge, now legally mine. I had left behind the chaos of Austin, canceled all my freelance gigs, and promised myself 2 months of off-grid silence. The air smelled like pine and freedom. I brewed a mug of coffee, stepped outside, and decided to finally hang the vintage bird feeder my mom had mailed me, one of those old metal ones shaped like a sunflower. I found the perfect branch, tied it off, and admired the way it caught the light. That was the moment she arrived. She didn't walk up the gravel path, she stormed it, like an HOA SWAT team of one. Clipboard raised like a weapon. She didn't say hello. Didn't ask my name. Just pointed straight at the bird feeder and shouted, "That's a violation of Ridge Code 4B. You're baiting invasive species. That's ecological sabotage." Her voice had the kind of sharpness that could carve marble. The dog, a tiny thing named Bean, yapped like it was echoing its owner's lawsuit energy. I blinked, unsure if this was real. "It's a bird feeder," I said slowly. "For birds." She stepped closer. "Exactly. Hummingbirds attract predators. Predators endanger pets. Pets cause disruption. Disruption undermines ecological balance. Do you see the chain reaction?" I looked at Bean, who was now growling at a pine cone. "Yeah, seems catastrophic." That's when she pulled out her phone and started dialing like she was reporting a hostage situation. I thought it was a bluff. I laughed, genuinely. The absurdity of it hit me like a sitcom cold open. She gave the dispatcher my address, said I was hostile and non-compliant, and demanded immediate ecological enforcement. I was still holding a bag of sugar when the first sheriff cruiser rolled up 20 minutes later, followed by a second. Both officers looked confused. One asked for my ID. The other looked at the feeder like it might explode. "Sir, are you the property owner?" I didn't answer. I walked to my truck, pulled out the lockbox, and handed over the deed packet my grandfather had insisted I always keep. "Jake Thompson," I said. "And yes, not just this cabin. I own this whole hillside, all 162 acres. For a moment, the only sound was Bean panting like it had just run a marathon in its mind. The officer skimmed the documents, raised an eyebrow, and gave a long, low whistle. "Well," he said, "looks like you're in the clear, Mr. Thompson." Cheryl, the pink Karen, visibly recoiled. Her grip on the clipboard tightened like she was going to staple me to a tree. "He can't own this land," she snapped. "We're a community. This is under HOA supervision." The deputy turned to her. "Ma'am, this property was registered private. No HOA jurisdiction, always has been." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a confused goldfish. Bean let out a single confused bark. I almost said something, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled, not out of smugness, okay, maybe a little, but because I knew I'd just watched the first domino fall. After they left, I stood under the tree and sipped the now cold coffee. The feeder swayed gently, unbothered. Birds hadn't even arrived yet, but the drama sure had. I had expected bugs, maybe a raccoon or two, not clipboard warfare. But something told me Cheryl Blanton wasn't done. Her visor gleamed in the morning sun like a warning shot. She'd be back. And next time, she wouldn't come alone. The cops may have driven off, but Cheryl Blanton didn't. Not in spirit, not in agenda. By the following morning, the mountain air was thinner, not because of altitude, but because my driveway looked like it had been targeted by a passive-aggressive printer cult. Stapled to my mailbox post, taped to a pine near the porch, and zip-tied to my fence gate were 3 flyers, all boasting the same fake letterhead: Mountain Ridge Homeowners Ecological Enforcement Authority. The logo was clearly made in Microsoft Word with a poorly drawn tree and an eagle that looked more like a sad pigeon. The citations were masterpieces of bureaucratic nonsense. One accused me of visual disharmony through unapproved ornamentation, aka the bird feeder. Another claimed I had violated pollinator zoning restrictions. by encouraging bee activity near a walking path that didn't exist. The third was my personal favorite, unauthorized avian waste accumulation. At first, I thought it was funny. I peeled off the flyers, took pictures, and texted them to a friend back in Austin with the caption, "My HOA has gone rogue." But something about the wording nagged at me. These weren't jokes. They were crafted, specific, and meant to sound real to someone who didn't know better. And sure enough, by noon, two people walking their dogs down the road gave my cabin a wide berth like the pine trees were leaking radiation. One guy even whispered to his wife, "That's the guy Cheryl's warning about." That night, I walked the perimeter with a flashlight. Around the back fence, I found two more flyers, one stuck to a tree with double-sided tape, another wedged into a crack in the old survey marker. Karen was doing paper warfare, one fake rule at a time, so I fought back the way any good grandson of a war vet would. I went tactical. I installed 3 trail cameras the next day, one at the entrance to the gravel path, one behind the compost bins, and one tucked beneath a fake rock near the edge of the east ridge. Motion activated. Night vision. Full color capture. I didn't tell anyone, just waited. It only took 48 hours. Around 12:43 a.m., the alert pinged my phone. I opened the feed expecting maybe a raccoon, or if I was lucky, a deer. But there she was, Cheryl Blanton, wearing a headlamp that made her look like a coal miner lost in the suburbs, holding a plastic grocery bag stuffed with flyers. She moved with intent, slapping papers to trees like she was blessing them with HOA scripture. At one point, she stopped and saluted a mailbox. I nearly dropped my phone, laughing. The next day, I showed the footage to my nearest neighbor, a wiry, white-bearded man named Marty who lived half a mile down the slope. He watched the video, sighed, then said, "She tried this with the last guy who lived here, too. Kept citing him for improper wood stacking. He left after 6 weeks. I asked what happened to him. "Moved to Arizona," Marty said. "Said he'd rather get bit by scorpions than deal with Karen." And he clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Don't let her win. That's what she feeds on." I thanked him and walked back home with a new resolve. If Karen wanted to play Queen of the Ridge, I was going to be the cartographer. And I'd draw the lines in permanent ink. That night, the fog rolled in thick across the ridge, making the trees look like they were holding secrets. I poured a bourbon, reviewed the camera footage again, and started printing my own signs. Not fake citations, just facts. Private property, 24-hour video surveillance. Trespassers will be recorded and prosecuted. I laminated them, nailed them in place, and added a red dot to each one that matched the iris sensor angle of my cams, subtle enough to unsettle anyone snooping. By sunrise, every path into my land had a sign, and that morning, just as I finished screwing the last one into an oak tree near the stream bed, I spotted Cheryl on her deck, binoculars in hand, watching me. She didn't wave. She just slowly lowered the glasses, turned, and walked inside. The calm before the next stupid storm. I could feel it coming. Cheryl's silence didn't last long. After my signs went up, she vanished for a day and a half, which in Karen time is practically hibernation. I had almost convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, the trail cam footage and the warnings had done their job. Maybe she'd decided to redirect her energy toward knitting aggressively worded Christmas sweaters. But then came the soft thud of something hitting my gate. I walked out and found a new flyer, this one laminated. It read, "Unlicensed surveillance equipment in violation of Ridge privacy mandate." And below that in fine print, "Residents reserve the right to neutralize threats to visual tranquility." I laughed out loud. Visual tranquility? I was staring at a woman who had once lined her garden with inflatable flamingos that lit up at night. But the kicker wasn't the flyer. It was the phrase Ridge privacy mandate. It wasn't real. And that got me thinking, what else around here wasn't real? The next morning, I drove into town and walked into the Stone Pine County Clerk's office like a man preparing for war with maps. I asked to see every record related to my land parcel and the lot surrounding it. The clerk, a kind man named Ronald, with a mustache that belonged in a spaghetti western, didn't even blink. "Let me guess," he said. "HOA trouble?" I nodded. "You're not the first." 20 minutes later, I was flipping through plat maps, zoning charts, and old survey records like I was on a treasure hunt. And then I found it. Page 17 of the original 1996 survey for Cheryl's property, Lot 14. Her backyard deck extended nearly 30 feet past the legal lot line, and not just over the edge, squarely onto land that belonged to my parcel. I checked, rechecked, pulled out a ruler just to be petty. There was no mistake. Cheryl hadn't just been trespassing on foot. She had built infrastructure on my land. I drove straight to a print shop and had the map blown up to poster size, then bought a roll of bright orange boundary tape, the kind used by surveyors in crime scenes. Appropriate, considering this was starting to feel like both. That afternoon, I walked the slope behind her house and found the exact marker, an old iron stake half buried beneath moss and years of wishful thinking. I used a mallet to drive a new stake next to it, wrap the tape around 2 pine trees, and tie it off right at the base of her deck steps. Then I planted a wooden sign that read, "Boundary under review. Do not disturb private property. Legal process pending." Not aggressive, not threatening, just enough to make her panic, which of course she did almost immediately. 20 minutes later, Cheryl came tearing down the hill like I'd set her begonias on fire. She wore a visor, pajama pants with tiny anchors on them, and a fury that could melt plastic. "What is this?" she shrieked, pointing at the sign. "You can't just stake claims on HOA property." I didn't even look up from my drill. "That's actually my property, according to the county clerk. Want a copy of the map?" She narrowed her eyes like I'd offered her poison. You're vandalizing community assets. This deck was approved by the HOA in 2003. I gestured calmly toward the forest. "That would be impressive, except the HOA was never legally filed with the county, and my deed predates your deck by 6 years. Her jaw dropped. Bean, her ever-confused chihuahua, whined like he knew this was going downhill fast. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You're going to regret this. I have lawyers." "Great," I said. "Mine loves HOA cases. It's like Sudoku for him." That night, I poured a drink, propped up the new map on my coffee table, and traced the property line with a highlighter like a general planning a siege. This wasn't just about signs and bird feeders anymore. Cheryl had literally built her kingdom on stolen soil. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't backing down either. And something told me she wouldn't go down without another performance. I was right, because the next morning, there was a new flyer on my porch. Only this time, it wasn't printed. It was handwritten in red Sharpie on the back of a frozen pizza box. It read, "You started this, just remember that." The ink was still wet. The pizza box manifesto was apparently Cheryl's version of diplomacy, because what came next made that red Sharpie rant look like a love letter. 2 days after I marked the boundary, I received an envelope in the mail, tucked carefully between the pages of a local real estate circular like it was trying to sneak past enemy lines. The paper was thick, faux parchment with a fake gold embossed seal that read, "Stone Pine Homeowners Environmental Council," a name I'd never heard, for a group that didn't legally exist. The letter was written in formal bureaucratic tone, sprinkled with legal-sounding phrases like code compliance and ecological disturbance resolution. It demanded that I immediately remove all unauthorized biological installations, which apparently included my bird feeder, compost bin, and somehow the wildflowers that had grown naturally along my gravel path. It also stated I was required to submit a written statement of environmental impact and ecosystem mitigation strategies within 7 business days. I would have laughed again, but part of me was genuinely impressed by the creativity. It was like HOA Mad Libs printed on stock paper. There was no signature, just a title. Acting Director of Environmental Stewardship, SHES. I didn't need a trail cam to know who sent it. Cheryl was no longer just annoying. She was escalating into performance art. The next day, just for kicks, I Googled Stone Pine Homeowners Environmental Council. Nothing, no filings, no tax ID, no website, not even a Facebook page, which is practically a crime in suburban America. This was a full-blown phantom HOA, dreamed up and weaponized for one purpose: intimidation by paperwork. And if she was faking letters, what else was she faking? That question got answered real fast when 2 mornings later, a white Ford F-150 with a government seal pulled into my driveway. A tall man in khaki stepped out holding a clipboard and an ID badge that read Eli Connors, County Environmental Officer. For a moment, I braced for the worst. Was this actually working? Was Cheryl's ecosystem fiction dragging real agencies into her fantasy? "Mr. Thompson," he asked, "we received a complaint regarding unpermitted environmental modifications on your property. Mind if I take a look around?" I sighed, waved him in, and said, "Sure. But fair warning, You're not going to find much drama unless squirrels count as organized crime. Eli was polite, thorough, and surprisingly friendly. He walked the property, inspected the compost, peeked at the bird feeder, and took notes on a small tablet. After 20 minutes, he turned to me with a confused smile. Honestly, this is one of the cleanest backwoods homesteads I've seen all month. I asked him directly if the complaint had any merit. He shook his head. Nope, compost is properly maintained, your feeder's within code, and your runoff situation is textbook. Whoever reported this either doesn't understand basic ecology or doesn't like you. He paused, probably both. Then, looking around, he said something unexpected. This place would be perfect for a firewatch perch. A small one. You've got elevation, clear lines of sight, and no canopy coverage on the south ridge. I blinked. Wait, you're suggesting I build a tower? Sure, he said. Even if it's just recreational. Gives you better view and makes it harder for folks to claim you're hiding things. I couldn't help but smile. The idea of Cheryl staring up at a tower labeled Wildfire Observation and Squirrel Appreciation Station was borderline euphoric. As Eli drove off, he handed me his card and said to call if I had more trouble. I tucked it into my wallet, then stood on the porch staring at the south ridge. The thought of building something wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about clarity, visibility, something Cheryl clearly couldn't stand. I walked the path up to the ridge that afternoon, paced off a few measurements, and started sketching plans. I didn't need a mansion, I needed perspective. But before I could so much as pour the foundation, a new flyer appeared. This one was duct taped to my trailhead gate. It read, "Unauthorized vertical construction will result in citation per Article 9 of the Community Viewshed Accord." Below it, her name in Sharpie, Acting President, SHSC. She wasn't just faking it anymore, she was doubling down. I barely finished pulling the last piece of duct tape off Cheryl's latest flyer before I got to work. If she wanted to pretend the woods were some HOA battleground, I'd go ahead and build my fort. Except mine would be real, legal, and standing 12 feet tall at the ridge's edge, like a wooden exclamation mark. It wasn't for surveillance, it wasn't for spite, it was for sight. The south ridge gave me a clean view over the entire valley, a perfect line over the treetops to where the sun hit the horizon like it had something to say. I started simple: concrete footers, pressure-treated posts, a narrow stairwell, 2 weeks of sunburn, sweat, and the occasional deer watching me like a foreman. When I knelt down the platform, I stood at the top, took a breath, and thought, this is mine. Clear, documented, unshakable. That night, I slept better than I had since Cheryl had first mentioned Code 4B. Of course, my peace didn't even last to sunrise. The next morning, while I was sipping coffee on the tower and watching crows bicker in the tree line, I spotted Cheryl on her back patio with what looked like a DSLR camera the size of a bazooka. She aimed it straight at the platform, clicked repeatedly, then pulled out her phone and began pacing like a caffeinated mall cop. By the end of the day, flyers started showing up again. This time, not on trees, in mailboxes. I got mine in a glossy folder labeled Community Security Briefing. Inside was a photo of my tower, horribly zoomed and slightly tilted, with the caption, "Unauthorized surveillance installation threatens privacy of Ridge residents." Beneath that, possible hunting structure. Known off-grid mail with military-grade equipment now has elevated vantage point. Military grade. I had a Coleman thermos and a pair of binoculars from Bass Pro. But she wasn't done. By the weekend, I noticed fresh papers taped to the community bulletin board outside the little market down the hill. It was a petition. Remove illegal structure threatening neighborhood, viewshed, and wildlife habitat. At the bottom were 20 names. Some familiar, some clearly dragged into it blind. I ran into Marty, my retired neighbor, who chuckled and said, "She told me you were installing a sniper nest." I said, "Lady, he's got birdseed in a compost bin, not a militia." Another neighbor, Tina, admitted she signed without reading. She said it was about trail paving, she mumbled, clearly embarrassed. Cheryl was playing HOA telephone. Twist the truth just enough to get signatures, stack them like ammo, and hope no one checked the chamber. That afternoon, I was measuring post angles when a beat-up red Tacoma rolled up and parked on the fire lane. Out stepped Doug Whitaker, a retired forest ranger who lived on the far end of the ridge for 30 years. I'd only met him once before at a roadside produce stand where he complained about blueberries tasting too clean. He held a faded manila folder under one arm and wore a canvas vest full of old patches. "Heard you stirred the clipboard queen," he said, grinning. "She's been trying to redraw this hill since I had hair." He handed me the folder. Inside were copies of original boundary maps from the ADS, yellowed and annotated in pencil. He pointed to a specific corner where Cheryl's lot met the community commons. "She tried moving this marker in A9, claimed the wind had shifted it. Took her 2 months and a threat of court before she backed off." He tapped the deck line. "You're not the first. You just might be the last." I thanked him, scanned the maps that evening, and pinned a copy to the tower wall, not as a threat, just as a reminder. This wasn't a new war. This was a generational one. Cheryl didn't hate me. She hated limits, and the tower wasn't just a structure. It was a symbol that her power had a ceiling. A week later, I found another envelope in my mailbox. It wasn't a flyer this time. It was an official-looking letter stamped with a new seal. Community View, said Integrity Committee. The petition was now framed as a motion for structure removal pending compliance hearing. No return address. But I'd recognize that choice of words anywhere. Cheryl wasn't done. She was just changing tactics. And I had a feeling the next move would be louder. I knew the envelope with the fake seal was just a decoy move, a warning shot before something bigger. Sure enough, a few days later, I received a certified letter from the county zoning board. A public hearing had been scheduled to review a boundary dispute involving parcel 32B, mine, and 32C, Karen's. It was official. Cheryl had tried to escalate her HOA cosplay into a real legal fight. I wasn't surprised. I was ready. I called my attorney, Elena Ramirez, a quiet but surgical land-using lawyer who once told me she considered HOAs the final boss of American pettiness. We met at a cafe the day before the hearing, and I laid out everything. The maps from Doug, the drone footage, trail cam video of Karen posting flyers at 1:14 a.m. in a camo hoodie with the tag still dangling, and the petition with signatures that half the neighborhood didn't even know they gave. The hearing was held at the Stone Pine County Municipal Building in a beige room that smelled like recycled paper and stress. Folding chairs faced a long table with 3 officials seated under a seal that read, Office of Land Use and Property Rights. Cheryl arrived 10 minutes early, flanked by 2 neighbors and armed with a poster board collage that looked like it had been made by a 4th grade collage club. "Protect the ridge," it screamed in red glitter glue. Another board featured a zoomed-in photo of my tower with lightning bolts drawn around it. Cheryl wore a beige suit, large sunglasses indoors, and a scarf that screamed First Lady of HOA. She walked in like she owned the place, though history suggested she had trouble even owning her own backyard. Elena opened calmly. She presented the county records first, then the annotated maps from Doug, followed by the drone images that clearly showed the deck encroaching a full 31.5 feet into my parcel. Then came the video footage. Karen applying duct tape to a signpost under moonlight, whispering to herself, then tripping on a root and muttering, "Stupid squirrels." The room was silent except for one official who quietly cleared his throat to cover a laugh. Elena ended her presentation with a simple statement. "We are not here to humiliate anyone. We are simply here to restore the truth of property lines as recorded and recognized by the county." Short, sharp, and impossible to argue with. Then it was Cheryl's turn. She stood, dramatically adjusted her scarf, and launched into a 10-minute monologue that sounded like a TED Talk delivered by someone who had recently hit their head on a solar panel. She spoke of the sacred ecological harmony of the ridge, of unseen spiritual boundaries, and of long-standing neighborhood spirit under siege. She waved her glitter signs like sacred text and accused me of building a sniper nest disguised as a conservation effort. She insisted the petition was a democratic expression of communal values and not a product of coercion or misinformation. Then she pulled out a printed charter for the Stone Pine Homeowners Environmental Council and claimed it had historical standing. One of the officials looked at it, flipped it over, and said dryly, "Ma'am, this is printed on the back of a Michael's craft store receipt." When the board delivered their findings, it wasn't even close. The chair, a woman named Marlene with a haircut that could split firewood, spoke plainly. "Based on current surveys, historical documentation, and the preponderance of evidence, the deck structure attached to Lot 32B, It's Mr. Blanton. You have two options: remove the infringing structure within 60 days or submit to a valuation process to purchase the affected portion of land at market rate. Failure to comply will result in a formal encroachment order and potential civil penalties. Cheryl's jaw locked. She tried to respond, but no words came out. One of her supporters whispered something and quickly gathered their things. Another neighbor, Tina, the one who'd signed the petition without reading it, mouthed, "I'm sorry," at me as she followed Cheryl out the door. Back outside, Elena and I stood in the parking lot, watching the beige SUV vanish down the hill like it had just lost a parade. "She'll appeal," I said. "Probably," Elena replied, "but it won't hold. You buried her in evidence." She brought glitter. We shared a quiet laugh, and I shook her hand. For the first time in weeks, I felt a real shift, like the mountain had tilted just a few degrees back toward balance. But Cheryl wasn't the kind to go down with dignity. And as I drove home past her house, I saw something taped to her window, a new flyer printed in red and gold. I couldn't make out the words yet, but I had a hunch it didn't say "sorry for the trouble." The flyer on Karen's window didn't last more than 12 hours. It was gone by the next morning, replaced by tightly drawn blackout curtains and a silence that felt staged, like the quiet before a community theater meltdown. I figured she was licking her wounds, maybe re-strategizing. I didn't expect what came next. 2 nights later, just after 1 a.m., my phone buzzed with a trail cam alert. When I opened the app, I didn't see a raccoon or a stray dog. I saw Cheryl Blanton, dressed head to toe in black, moving like a Mission Impossible extra with a grudge. She had gloves, a flashlight clenched between her teeth, and what looked like a tire iron. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. She approached the fire watchtower, checked for cameras, then started yanking at the bottom steps like she was trying to audition for Extreme Makeover, Vandalism Edition. I watched her damage 2 boards, bend a railing, and then stomp off after flashing both middle fingers toward the nearest lens. By sunrise, I was already at the sheriff's office with a USB drive, 3 screenshots, and 2 broken stair planks loaded in my truck bed. Officer Sanchez, same guy from the hummingbird feeder incident, took one look at the footage and said, "We've officially moved past HOA drama and into felony dumbassery." He filed it as criminal mischief and harassment, noting that since there was documented property damage and a pattern of behavior, Cheryl would receive a formal citation and a no-contact warning. "She touches one more nail," he said, "and we escalate this to trespassing with malicious intent." He paused, glanced at the footage again, and muttered, "She really wore camo pants for this." I left with a copy of the report and a sense that justice, slow and steady, was finally catching up. What I didn't expect was the ripple effect. That weekend, 3 neighbors I barely knew showed up at my cabin. One brought banana bread, another a box of nails, and the third, a soft-spoken woman named Gina, handed me a note and said, "Karen asked me to deliver this." I didn't read it. You probably shouldn't either. I took it, tossed it in the woodpile unopened, and invited him up to the tower for coffee. As we stood overlooking the valley, the stories started spilling. One man had been fined for overly enthusiastic Halloween decor. Plastic skeletons apparently were emotionally disruptive. Another woman had received 3 written warnings for leaving her welcome mat out past sunset. But the kicker came from a retired veteran named Harold. "She knocked on my door last July," he said, "and told me my American flag was flying 6 inches too high, said it violated the HOA's visual elevation code." His voice cracked with both anger and disbelief. "My son died in uniform, and she told me it was aesthetic pollution." The rage that sat quietly in each neighbor's throat finally had a direction. "Why didn't anyone say anything before?" I asked. Gina shrugged. "She had us believing she was the HOA. She made up rules faster than we could break them." Harold nodded. "Most of us just wanted peace, but she turned silence into compliance. I didn't give a speech or make a toast. I just handed them a stack of paper plates and said, 'We're having a barbecue next Saturday. Bring a chair and something to grill. No flyers, no codes, just food and fire.'" The word spread faster than her fake citations ever had. That Saturday, the tower deck became the unofficial community summit. Folding chairs lined the railing, kids chased each other between pine trees, and someone brought an old speaker that played Johnny Cash like a battle anthem. I smoked brisket, Doug brought moonshine. Even Marty, who hadn't smiled in 3 months, laughed so hard he nearly choked on a deviled egg. Cheryl's house, visible just beyond the tree line, remained dark, curtains closed, driveway empty, being the Chihuahua didn't bark once. At one point, a guest raised a red Solo cup and said to Jake, "For giving the mountain his backbone back." I shook my head and said, "I just built a platform. You all climbed up." As the sun dipped below the ridge, I climbed the tower and looked out over the clearing. Firelight danced, laughter echoed, and for the first time, this didn't feel like my land. It felt like our land. But Cheryl wasn't done yet, because the next morning, tucked beneath a rock on my front step, I found a document, not handwritten, not Sharpie this time. It was neatly printed, notarized, and marked with a real legal seal. She was filing an appeal. The legal envelope tucked beneath the rock didn't rattle me. By that point, Cheryl Blanton had weaponized every tool in her imaginary arsenal. Flyers, fake counsels, petitions, even nocturnal sabotage and tactical yoga pants. The appeal was just the final move in her handbook of denial, and this time it backfired immediately. Alina filed a countermeasure within 48 hours, backed by every zoning map, timestamp video, and county ruling we collected. The appeal was dismissed in less than a week. No hearing, no argument, just a single line from the judge: "Petitioner lacks legal standing." I read it twice, then printed it out and pinned it to the inside wall of the tower. That was the last official word Cheryl Blanton ever spoke to the county of Stonepine. She didn't throw a fit. She didn't hold a press conference on her patio. She simply vanished from public life like someone had flipped the HOA switch to off. A few weeks later, I got a call from a local real estate agent named Calvin, who said, with a conspiratorial whisper, "I have a quiet listing you might want to see." It was Cheryl's house. No signage, no online ads, just a few targeted calls to people with large parcels nearby. The seller, he added, mentioned wanting a discreet buyer who would restore dignity to the ridge. I nearly laughed through the phone. I told him I'd consider it. Then I called Elena. Within 3 days, I had a holding LLC created, Clearview Ridge Holdings, and submitted a cash offer just below asking. Cheryl accepted without a counter, no meeting, no handshake. The deed transferred 2 weeks later. Just like that, the house that had birthed the fictional HOA became mine. The house needed work. The wallpaper looked like a migraine, the carpets held decades of stress, and the deck, now legally mine, leaned ever so slightly like it missed its owner's delusions. I gutted it, not out of spite, but to breathe. I ripped up the old vinyl and replaced it with pine flooring. I opened the windows, tore down the blackout curtains, and let the forest back in. Then I posted a quiet message on a regional hiking forum and a local veterans group. Need a place to reset? Stay free at Lookout Lodge. Priority for teachers, vets, and public servants. No paperwork, no catch. The response came in trickles. Emails from burned-out high school counselors, Forest Service volunteers, and one retired EMT who just wanted to see trees again. The first guest was a young teacher from Phoenix who had quit mid-semester after budget cuts. She stayed 3 days and cried on the porch the last night. "I just forgot what peace felt like," she said. Word spread. People came, stayed, and left thank you notes on the counter. Some brought cookies, others left drawings. One person left a carved hiking stick with the words "Stand Tall" etched into the handle. I didn't charge a dime. I didn't need to. What I got in return couldn't be banked. Doug, the retired ranger, showed up one morning with lumber and a grin. "Thought we'd make the tower a little taller," he said. We rebuilt it together, added a second landing, better stairs, a wind gauge, and a bench up top wide enough for 3. When it was done, he looked out over the ridge and muttered, "Now that's oversight." The neighbors helped too. Marty donated chairs, Gina planted wildflowers along the trail, and Harold brought a flag. No one asked permission. No one needed a vote. It wasn't an HOA. It was a community finally stretching after years of tension. On the front porch of the lodge, I hung a small wooden sign, hand-carved by a neighbor's grandson who was learning woodworking. It read, "Welcome, no clipboard required." People smiled when they saw it. Cheryl's old followers never returned, and no one asked about the past. The lodge wasn't a monument to victory. It was a platform for rest, for breathing, for starting over. Sometimes, late at night, I'd climb the tower and just sit, watching the wind roll over the trees. I'd think of my grandfather. I'd think of the silence he'd left me and the voice I'd found inside it. One morning, while clearing brush along the trail behind the old fire pit, I found something unexpected. Half buried beneath moss and leaves, a rusted clipboard. The plastic cracked, the clip bent, but still there. I stared at it, smiling to myself. I didn't keep it. I didn't burn it either. I just set it gently on a stump at the ridge's edge, let the wind take care of it. Then I turned and walked back toward the lodge, toward the sound of laughter and hammers, of new guests arriving. The mountain was no longer under siege. It was alive. And this time, everyone belonged. Some battles don't need fists. They need footage, patience, and a well-timed cease and desist. Cheryl came in with fake titles, fake flyers, and a clipboard full of delusions, but in the end, all it took was one boundary line, a tower, and a community tired of being bossed around. She lost the deck, lost the fight, and quietly sold the house she once called HOA HQ. Now it's Lookout Lodge, and her old throne, a bench for tired hikers. So if you've ever faced a Karen with too much time and a love for fake power, let me know in the comments. What did she try, and how did you clap back? Hit like, share this tale with your favorite anti-Karen, and remember, peace isn't passive. Sometimes it's built 12 feet high with cameras, a grill, and neighbors who finally said, "Not today, clipboard."